Hello and welcome to this brand new series of testing vlogs called Testing 123, bite-sized chunks of wisdom brought to you by the leaders in testing. I'm Paul Hazards, Marketing Manager for Sogeti Belgium and Luxembourg, and I have the pleasure to introduce our very first episode of Testing 123. Our first speaker is Daniel Maslyn, and he will be talking about agile testing in these challenging times. Does it mean that you have to stop testing, or can the agile mindset perhaps bring a solution? Without further ado, over to you, Daniel.
Thanks for that introduction, Paul. Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Maslyn. I'm a senior test consultant here at Sogeti, and I want to talk to you today about distributed agile testing. Of course, in this context that we're facing right now, a lot of testing teams in general with software, are asking, how do we adjust? What do we do now? In this viewpoint, testing, of course, is very essential for business continuity, and that's the angle I'm coming from today. When we did our World Quality Report 2019-2020, perhaps we didn't foresee this kind of a context, but one thing is for sure is that when we interviewed people throughout the globe, we see that different testing teams face different challenges, but responding to it requires some similar ways. And of course, these are creative times, so we require creative solutions, attitude shifts, adjustments, aligned with the quality vision. And that's a bit what I want to talk about today. So the subjects are in the agenda here today are looking at your agile context, understanding the difference between remote versus distributed ways of working where you harness more of the part of your team, some practical considerations in how you'll get to the test object and how your DNA adjusts to this time, and then identifying gaps and opportunities here, of course, as well, looking for some structured adjustments in these times, using some model for that, moving towards a new way of working, a new normal, and of course, moving forward, because there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and we will get through this together. So looking at this agile testing context, well, you might be working with Scrum or another system, but your people play a key part. The roles they perform, the events, the artifacts they're making also play an aspect. But one underlying aspect is the agile mindset, which needs to be continued in this time, supported and engaged. In testing, how testing relates to agile is, of course, working in a more iterative way, more in a cyclic way, in sprints, perhaps. And the roles that you fulfill in testing and the process you use and the approach, of course, an emphasis on tools and the environment and the scope that you get at. We're not so much focusing here on different types of testing in this particular session. That could be for some later sessions. But since the main measure of progress in Agile is working software, the focus is on that. So high performance models you might be using like DevOps, or you might be working in Agile hybrid way, or maybe even a sequential IT delivery model. I think this talk is relevant for these times in how you're doing distributed working and distributed testing. Of course, I stick with the Agile phase. So let's understand what is this difference between remote versus distributed. Well, before this kind of context, we of course were working in more face-to-face. We had contact with other teams, business. We had contact with all kinds of different people throughout the organization in a more face-to-face way. And of course, we were in-house, so the test tools and test data were readily available. And we could follow up on test activities and progress in a more immediate way, face-to-face. But now we then are working in a home situation. So working from home means some testers could feel isolated, team members could feel too remote and not working in an agile mindset, not shifting to this distributed way. And that's what we really should be going for, is a distributed way to harness the entire power of the team, with an emphasis, of course, now more on that infrastructure and access to each other in a virtual way. That's really what it's all about, is coming together on a daily basis and testing and keeping the momentum and progress through that virtual structure. Of course, at some point, we'll be returning back to that way we did before, with more face-to-face communication, and this challenge is over. And we can take some things that we learned in this period, and that's also maybe another subject for another vlog in the future, is how we can bring that coming back, that returning aspect. But for this vlog, I'd like to stick here with the distributed area. Of course, there are some practical considerations to take in mind. The first thing, of course, is the effect of this on your people, your testing engine. They need to have access to all of the different tools, the test object, activities need to keep moving. The agile mindset plays a role here. But keep in mind, some people are really able to work in this kind of distributed way, and remote, and they have the skills for that. And other people need more support in that time. This is also a good time to work on knowledge transfer and self-improvements, of course, and that's an important part of Agile, is improving. And certainly that's an aspect, but another aspect is the cultural aspect and the wellness of the tester. This is a challenging time for everyone, and that needs to be taken into consideration. Of course, also, this is a very, very busy time for people working in infrastructure. Help desks and everything are trying to keep things absolutely moving. From testing, I'm looking at this from two aspects, from how we test and what we test. We need to have absolutely an infrastructure that allows for that kind of transformation to this way of working virtually, that allows for the testing team to communicate to the different stakeholders on a day-to-day basis and pivot between development and business and really actually be aligned virtually. So essentially, the continuity for your business in testing is going to be related to the continuity for access for your people to this infrastructure and to be able to continue their communications, to have access to their test tools and their environments. So a question you might be asking, or how possible is it for us to be able to work in the cloud with our test data and test objects access? And of course, I broke this down into essentially three areas: time management and opening that space to that new solution, and communications and access. The team here is going to become more essential, more emphasis on self-organizing. They need to be able to work together in this virtual world and set this kind of pace together. The testers are part of that. So Agile testing is transparent, and the focus is on working software. So the goal is to set up all of these areas and respond to that change so that you keep that in focus. So this means that meetings need to be timed correctly if you're working in geographic teams, especially daily Scrum, demos, increments, retrospectives, all of these need to occur maybe through virtual meeting systems and platforms. And if you don't have that, of course, you need to find ways to access that and get that moving. Of course, communication is important. Team members need to communicate frequently, plan their activities. For this, dashboards are important, using Kanban tools, electronic dashboards, and test management tools. Some of them allow for this remotely and virtually, and that's a good idea to look into that. And this presents new challenges, of course, for test tool licensing and test data management, given the GDPR, and VPN access, of course, to the test object and the security challenges that that presents. But of course, access here is really, especially again, if you're working in different geographies, is really 24/7. Of course, another important idea is to look for the gaps, the areas where you need to improve in, to identify them first, and then maybe to look for the opportunities that presents. So using some models, and here I'm using a building block model like TPI Next, just as a reference, which is a Sogeti test improvement model, of course, with different maturity levels. But here I'm looking more to the 16 key areas as a kind of reference point, which are broken down to the three areas: stakeholder relations, test management, and test profession. Test tools and test environment, 15 and 16 here, come into play. But basically, the idea is to maybe use this as a kind of checklist in your considerations during your retrospectives, as an idea to think about areas where you can improve and look into improving, especially in relation to this distributed working, this distributed testing. So to look at the way you're working now and to come up with new ways and new solutions to work. An example here, if you look into the sprint retrospective, if applicable, of course, then you can look that using these three dimensions of stakeholder relations, test management, test profession, that in sprints, if you look in those dimensions, you might come up with these kind of improvements or benefits and action items that will come out in your sprint. Of course, in Agile, we go with the attitude that we don't know what we don't know. So this is not by any means to suggest that these are the things that you just put down de facto to improve. But these are examples of using TPI as a model and looking at the specific ones that relate to this working in distributed teams. So if you look, for example, at Sprint 1, upper left, they are resources available and meeting virtually. If you look at, let's say, Sprint 6, and same stakeholder relations, that the organization is investigating the use of new means of communication and defining that. Of course, this doesn't mean you need to wait until Sprint 6 for this, but these are just examples that I put together, because these are some examples of things and conclusions that you need to come to with your team. The team needs to actively participate in those retrospectives, and they need to also think and strive towards taking on these kind of new responsibilities for this new way of work and keeping continuous improvement as part of their work process. So this required maybe some structured adjustments in the way that you work virtually. And some models that help that are TMAP Next and Scrum. And of course, we have a Quality for DevOps book that just came out, which has a nice model, the voice model, which is of course based on value and delivering value along your pipelines or along your development life cycles or in your sprints, whatever the case may be, towards your clients. So this is a way of looking at priorities in testing and putting these priorities into a kind of prioritized way of looking at things. This guy in the center here is finding that coordination, dashboards, tooling, for example, after they did the retrospectives, are the key areas they want to improve on in these times. Looking at the value of the voice model in the upper left, the key thing here is to think about working software then, the real value from the experience of the IT in use. And of course, the IT delivery needs to be supported throughout this time virtually as well, where you have an idea of your objectives, what you want to test, what kind of indicators and metrics you're going to measure, how you can support that confidence when it's put into production. So setting the goals and timelines right now are important, and picking metrics that really matter become even more important in this time, because you need to visualize that progress for the stakeholders at this time, and usually in dashboards. Find creative ways to still keep in contact with your stakeholders in this virtual time to talk about in terms of, let's say, test cases that have been executed, results, relation of your effort, automation that's being carried out, any blocks you have, and some changes and these continuous improvements and sharing them with the rest of the stakeholders. Because I'm sure at this point your teams are adjusting to their test scope to accommodate the velocity changes that were incurred during this period, and this time of shifting to this new paradigm of working more virtually. So if you incorporate these adjustments based on your retrospectives and use these models as guidelines, this might be helpful. Because this reaches us, of course, to a new normal, and that new normal is kind of looking at it this way, that the tester is at home, yes, but if they're focused on value, then they're really just the team at home, which is part of a greater whole. And they're linked and working distributed, not just remotely. So that distributed work means that they've got their agile mindset and they're moving to identify gaps and solutions as part of this challenge. So they're taking on the challenge and they're moving forward and looking at it as an opportunity as well. They need to have access to their tools, to their test data, to the test object. They need the infrastructure to support their way, and you need to take in mind their wellness. And I think all of these kind of things add up to a good workstation. Bearing in mind that the underlying aspect here when you're thinking about Agile is the Agile Manifesto, of course, where individuals and interactions are much more and more important than processes and tools, essentially. Heuristically thinking, of course, it's not that one is more important than the other per se. Processes and tools remain important, but when it comes down to it, individuals' interactions should take precedence. Okay? So that's the kind of balance that you'll need to find, and that's the kind of way of working that you need to move forward. I think moving forward means that you need to look at where you're at. You might still be at the phase where you're absorbing this situation of working virtually with teams and understanding how to work with that. Then you're also needing to adjust that. And eventually you're going to control the way that you work, and eventually, hopefully, you'll get some ideas to innovate and optimize. That's a step-by-step process. And I think that maybe today we've gotten some ideas of things that you should consider with your context, working more distributed, some practical considerations, how to look for opportunities, and doing some structured adjustments with that. I think that will lead you to a new normal that will be supportive and engaging your testers and keeping that momentum. Of course, you may be looking for other solutions outside your organization as well. Sogeti is always in dialogue with our customers and clients about that. Thinking about subjects here like intelligent test automation and looking at how you can really reduce your effort and really fully optimize on this distributed situation. And maybe augmenting your workforce. And of course, looking to a solution that we call at Sogeti the Test Factory, which is really geared to this kind of distributed way of working and working with clients and testing their test objects in a distributed way. There are also, of course, other solutions to be discussed, so that's always something that could be subject of other vlogs in the future, or questions that we can take as well. So, with that in mind, I just want to recap and mention the references that were mentioned. One was the Agile Manifesto, TMAP Next, the TPI Next book. This is where you can get them on the web for the World Quality Report, and our new book out, Quality for DevOps, which I mentioned might be the subject of a vlog in the future. So these are references you might want to look into as well. And basically also some of these other books that could have been mentioned, like TMAP Infrastructure or Testing in the Cloud, those are all relevant titles as well. So please check those out. Those are interesting titles. And I just wanted to thank you for listening today about distributed agile testing. Again, my name is Daniel Maslyn, and that's the end of my story for today. We'll be coming up with some other subjects in the future, and I just want to hand it back over to Paul.
Thank you, Daniel. That was very interesting. So if you want to discover what Sogeti can do for you, how we can help you through these challenging times, don't hesitate and reach out to us via the contact form on our website. You can also check out www.tmap.net, where you can find the entire body of knowledge that's called TMAP. We've been building it since 1995 already, and you can also find the latest publication there, Quality for DevOps Teams. Thank you so much for joining us, and hope to catch you next time for our next episode of Testing 123.